Good afternoon, everybody. This is Karen Lee Harrington with the Maine Health Data Organization, and I think we'll go ahead and get started by the number of beeps that I've been hearing. It sounds like we've got quite a few people on the call, so I first and foremost, on behalf of the Maine Health Data Organization, want to thank all of you for taking time out of your very busy schedules to join us for this afternoon's call. We want to make it as productive as possible, so I'm going to move right along and jump into what we want to cover in today's session. And we may have people joining throughout the call, so my apologies for the beeping, but hopefully you are able to hear the speakers. So I'm going to move along and review today's goals of our time together. The first thing we want to do is have a discussion on the changes in Chapter 243 that have been generating some of the questions from the field. We'd like to provide some clarification and an opportunity to answer any specific questions that you may have as you prepare for those changes. We also want to review the implementation timeline, again, answer any specific questions that you have, and then we've got a few, if time allows, we have a few other updates and reminders that we want to share with you. This session is being recorded and it will be available on the website, so for any of you that want to pass this on to other colleagues to listen to, that will be an option. And we will also be posting some of the, or all of the questions that are raised and the answers that are provided we'll be posting in a FAQ, which will also be available through the portal. So with that said, I'm going to jump into the heart of this and turn the discussion over to Phil, who I think many of you know from the Maine Health Data Organization, and he will walk us through some of the clarification regarding some of the changes to Chapter 243.
Thank you, Karen Lee. One of the most difficult sections for payers is the service facility location information. So what I'd like to do is basically walk you through a definition, a clarification of where to find this information, and how to populate these fields. So essentially it's the what, where, and how of service facility location information. As far as the definition, what is it? It is a laboratory or facility where the healthcare service billed on the claim was performed or rendered. As far as where this information is found, I'm going to refer you with the link to our website, mhdo.maine.gov. To the left, there is rules and statutes, and if you go there, the electronic copy of Chapter 243, the pages that indicate where these pieces of information are located are in Appendix D2, pages 51 or 51 to 52. And the reason I'm stating this is that I have a printout that is slightly off. So if you have a printout that is also off, I would recommend that you refer to the electronic copy on our website. Finally, the population. If one looks in the 837s or the incoming claim transactions, you will note that service facility location loop is situational. So how should this be populated? If you capture this information in your systems, and it is different than the billing provider, meaning that it is not blank on the 837, then essentially you should populate the extract fields with the specific service facility information that is provided. If you capture these fields and they are the same as the billing provider, then you will find that they are blank on electronic transactions, and we would ask you to populate the extract fields with the same appropriate information that is given to the billing provider. So whatever you have for billing provider, you will have for the service provider, service facility location. If you do not capture these fields, please leave them blank and provide a reason or justification in the overrides or exemption request. Second topic is the continued use of the ICD-9 fields. Until ICD-10 is implemented, you are to continue using MCO 39 through MCO 53 and MCO 58. And that leads us to the last topic. What do you do with the ICD-10 block? Well, essentially what we're going to do is we've got two blocks. One of them is for retired fields and one is for blank fields. MCO 33 through MCO 35 used to be defined as service provider fields as far as location, city, state, and zip. Those are retired, and they are now defined as service facility location, city, state, and zip. So for the retired fields, you will leave those blank, but you will treat them, as I will mention in just a moment. The blank fields, the ICD-10 fields, are to be left blank. You will have the delimiters for them, and that is MCO 200 through MCO 326. And all you will do is provide asterisks with or anything in between. For the retired fields, MCO 33 through MCO 35, we gave an example. You would have a ... everything up to and including MCO 31, and then you have an asterisk, MCO 32 data string, an asterisk, and you'll see that between the asterisks, if you count it out, there is room for MCO 33, MCO 34, MCO 35, and then it goes to the MCO 36 data string and continues. So that is a piece of what the file would look like, and the MHDO will be providing on our website sample file layouts for you to look at. Now, I believe this is the first Q&A session for payers regarding Chapter 243 changes. Are there any questions?
Phil, this is Bhargavi from Wellpoint. So everything like what we've been doing before for the ICD-9 elements will still continue to follow the old logic, and except the fact that the ICD-10, the one starting from 200, I think, will have blanks now, correct?
That is correct. All the payer needs to do is have placeholders or delimiters for those fields, and they will be left blank, and there will be no validations for anything in there as far as content, but the delimiters are needed for structural validation of the file.
I understand. Okay. Thank you.
Are there any other questions?
I have a question. This is Amanda with Humana. When does this take place, Phil? When does this go into effect?
We are going live with this for October data, I believe, which is due by the end of November. And there is a testing period that will allow you to test your extracts and extract logic starting September 1st. so September 1st through September 30th, and then that will give you the month of October to, actually for both sides, to debug the system.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Are there any other questions before we turn it over to our partner, Human Service Research Institute, to walk you through the validation update? There'll be an opportunity to ask additional questions once we get through the validation. So hearing no other immediate questions, I'm going to turn this over to Leanne.
Thank you, Karen Lee. So this is Leanne Shandora at HSRI. So I'll be walking you through the next few slides. It's going to give you an overview of the validation update, some of the implementation timelines, and then some of the other changes and testing for Chapter 243, and then finish off with some payer questions that have come in and some updates and reminders. So the first piece that I'll be talking about are the validation updates. MHDO had sent out an updated validation list for the Chapter 243 changes, I think maybe on Tuesday, that kind of gave you the overview and the details of which validations were dropped for retired elements, which validations have been added for the new elements, and just some information about that. There will be no validations in place for the ICD-10 fields until the ICD-10 fields are enacted. I did, and as you will see, the worksheet that we had sent out only included those changes. It didn't include the full set of validations. So anything that didn't appear on that spreadsheet was going to remain the same. And so if you have access to our data submission portal, you can still go in and look at all the validation rules that are in place, and those will still remain the same with the exception of what we included in that worksheet. I did want to make mention of one thing. We had a payer send in a question related to the 2 pharmacy file changes. The change in the pharmacy file was splitting out 2 fields that used to be both populated with either what we call a DEA number or an MPI. And so we split those into 2 fields. So in one field, you will provide the DEA if you have it, and the MPI. We are going to be adding a new validation that wasn't on the list that makes sure at least one of those fields is populated, I think, like 99.5% of the time. So we do have a revision to the validations we sent out that we will resend sometime later this week. So you have the updated version. But otherwise, those are the validations that will be in place for the Chapter 243 changes. There were no validation changes, member eligibility, or dental claim files. So as you saw in the spreadsheet, there was one tab, medical claim changes, and that was most of the changes appeared in that file, and the other tab is for the pharmacy changes, and that is the tab that we'll be updating when we send out this new spreadsheet. So the next, are there any further questions about the validations that were sent out before I move into the implementation timeline?
Hi, Leanne. This is Shaquanda Johnson from Molina Healthcare. I just wanted to clarify that we won't have any validation changes for the new ICD-10 field, which will be in MC 200 through MC 326.
Correct. Those fields should remain blank until ICD-10 is enacted.
Okay.
So there'll be no actual validation. Right.
So once we go live, will we be validating those fields eventually?
Once ICD-10 is enacted, we'll send out notifications prior to that on the validations that will be in place for those fields.
Okay.
Leanne?
Yes.
I would just like to mention something with regard to Yuguanda's question, is that there are no new validations, but the any validation that will structurally validate the file regarding all of the delimiters that are needed, that will need to be modified for the proper number of placeholders, but there will be no validations regarding content for those placeholders. Does that make sense, Uganda?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Phil, for that clarification about the structure. The structure must be in the new Chapter 243 format. Thank you. Any other questions?
Hello?
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 Does anyone else have any other questions? All right, hearing nothing, I will move on to the next slide, which is the implementation timeline. As you can see, the adoption of the Chapter 243 rule happened back in May, and then the meeting date of today at 7/31 is when we're notifying payers of the validation decisions. We are going to be disseminating a sample file layout. I think some payers have asked about this for the new Chapter 243 layout. We're preparing that now and are going to disseminate that in the middle of August. And so hopefully that will help support the testing. We are creating a new test portal, and that will be opening September 1st. So many of you who have been submitting test data in the past are probably used to just submitting it through the production portal, named a different way. We're actually separating out the production and the test websites. So we'll be sending you information about how to access the test portal, and that's where you can begin testing your new Chapter 243 changes. I'll get into a little more detail about that in a moment. And then after that test period, we're going to make any necessary changes from our end, and the production portal will be ready to accept the new Chapter 243 format starting early November, and that is when you should be submitting your October 2014 data in the new Chapter 243 format. So the next slide, I'll just give a little more detail about testing. We encourage all payers to participate, just so that'll help you and us be prepared for when we do roll out the new Chapter 243 changes in November. You can submit any period of data in the new format. So whatever is easiest from your end to prepare the new file layout. And then just a reminder, and we'll remind you again of this when we do launch the test platform, is that any data submitted to the test environment will not be moved to the data warehouse. So you will have to still submit once the data warehouse opens. One other point I wanted to make is that this will also be in a secure environment, the same as our regular portal. It'll just be a kind of a copy of your regular production portal that you're already submitting through. So there will have the protections, the same security protections in place. I will go through a couple Q&As that have already come in, and then I'll open it up for more questions about the timeline and testing. So I'll just, as you can see on the screen, do we have an updated FAQ on the portal? Any other updated resource documents? So the FAQ in the portal is updated monthly. So if anything comes up, you should always check that first. Also, another good resource about the changes to Chapter 243 can be found on the MHDO website, which is also another great resource. And is there a sample file layout available in the portal? As I mentioned a few minutes ago, we'll be making a sample file layout for the revised Chapter 243 requirements. It will be distributed through the distribution list that you got for this webinar, and also posted in the resource section of the portal. So I'll once again open up the floor for questions.
State of Maine. Can you hear me?
Yes.
We have a couple questions. One, our vendor wants to know if they have the file ready prior to the new format ready prior to November 5th. Will you accept it early, or do we have to use the old format until the month of November?
We are only accepting the old format through the opening of the portal for the changes on November 5th. So data through September should be in the old format. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. And if we happen to be late and do not have it ready for November, can you accept the old format, or will we have to wait before we can submit?
Once we switch over to the new format, older data that is needed to be submitted will need to be in the new format.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Hello, this is Michael Larson with Test Health Plan.
Yes.
Hello.
Hello.
We're an out-of-state TPA, and so we submit quarterly because we have a low population. Would our Q4 reporting then be due January, as it normally would be?
Yes, that is correct. And that would be your first time submitting in the new format.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, hearing none, we will continue to send out notifications and reminders about the upcoming changes and when testing will begin. And because of the format switchover, we are allowing a little extra time into the month of November to be submitting your September data in case you're still working through any validation issues and you need resubmissions and don't want to have a format change in the middle. So please just keep aware of those dates and try to submit in the old format for your September data as soon as possible to make sure that you can have a clean cut over to the new format. So the next few slides are just some other updates and reminders of either questions that have come up frequently or things that we just want to make sure everyone is aware of with recent changes. In about a couple of months ago, we instituted a new locking process for submissions. Previously, if you were submitting older data or resubmitting files with dates that had been for a few months prior, you could just do that through the portal pretty easily without questions coming up. And recently, we instituted what is called the locking process. So what's been happening for the few months, and some of you may have noticed, is that submission periods are locked for data that has already been released to end users. So, and we release data every quarter. So if you were trying to submit data for a previous quarter, you would have received a structural validation that required a manual process of contacting the help desk for you to be able to continue with that submission. This way we were able to better keep track of data that had potentially already been released to end users that was now being replaced. So we could either notify the end users or send them replacement files. Because this was a very manual process, we've worked to improve this process. So the new process, which we're planning on starting the 7th of next month, the system itself will start collecting information from you about why your older data file is being submitted at that time. So the system will determine if the file is an initial submission, a replacement submission, or some supplemental submission based on the file naming, and we will go through the file naming in a minute. And if the data are less than a year old, a validation issue will come up that the data submitter will have to enter information about why they're submitting older data files. And if the submission of data is older than a year, you'll need to submit a request through the system that requires approval from MHDO. As part of MHDO's rule, any data that's either being resubmitted or submitted for the first time that's older than a year, they need explicit permission from MHDO to continue with the submission, just so we can start tracking these things better and to make sure all parties are aware of older data either being submitted or resubmitted. So this will just appear when you're submitting data. It will appear on your list of validation issues as a structural issue that you must resolve before you can continue with the submission of your file. So the next slide, I just want to go through file naming again. This has not changed. There was just two things I want to just give a little more detail about, because sometimes we find that submitters have a lot of questions about the sequence number and the version number. So I'm going to focus on those two elements of the file naming. So the sequence number we use within the system to differentiate files with otherwise identical file names. And sometimes sequence number will be used if a data file for a given month needs to be split into two different parts to submit, or if supplemental information claims become available for a month where you've already made an initial submission, and you would sequence, say, the second submission to number 2. So then we would know to accept both of those files for a given month. And then the next is the version number, and this is what we use in the system to identify replacement files. And so every time you do a replacement file, the number should be sequenced. And so we're also trying to cut down on, this also comes into play with the file locking. So if data that you've already submitted has been released, when you sequence the number up to 2, then the system will give you a validation so we know why you're submitting the replacement data, so we can communicate to our data users about the replacement data. So the next slide just gives you some examples. You can see the file names being laid out. So the first example is what you would name a file for the period ending of January 2013. It's a dental file with no resubmissions or supplemental files. So the sequence number is 1 and the version number is 1. And then the second is of a pharmacy file with no resubmissions or supplemental files. The next example gives an eligibility file with the initial file and then what a replacement would look like. So you see the 2 at the end, that's for a replacement file. And the final example gives an example of a supplemental file. So the initial file has the 1 after it says MC01, and then on the next line it has the MC02, which means it's a supplement, and we would have both of those files remain within the system. The next item is just giving more information about a change that went into the system a few months ago. We just want to make sure that everyone's clear about exemption requests. When you're making an exemption request within the system, the dates that you're requesting that it covers should include the date of the data. So, for example, if an exemption request for a January file is submitted in February, the start date should be January to cover the data date of the file. If you by accidentally select February, then the exemption will not be activated for that file. And the next screen is just what the actual exemption request screen looks like. So if you see the start period, that should start with the month that the data are for in your file. So in the example previously, this should be set to January to cover the data date of the file. So that covers kind of the highlights of some of the questions that have been coming in and some of the other updates that we had about the system changes. I'd like to open it back up for questions and then hand it back over to MHDO.